Please welcome our panellists, Her Excellency Ana Brnabić, Prime Minister of the Republic of Serbia. Founder and Executive Chairman of Econet Group, Strive Masiyiwa. Co-founder and Chairman of Infosys, Nandan Nilekani. Co-founder of Grab, Tan Hui Ling. And our moderator, anchor for Bloomberg Television, Haslinda Amin.
Thank you for joining us. Now more than ever, we're looking towards digital solutions to drive productivity, growth, and create a more inclusive society. For governments, McKinsey estimates that they can unleash $1 trillion of economic value if they can capture the full potential of digitization. And for companies, it's about unlocking value, creating new revenue streams, also serving not just the customers, but also their workers better. The problem is, as we get attached to technology, as we become more dependent on technology, there are challenges like privacy and cybersecurity. So, are the trade-offs justified? Are there ways to mitigate the risks? And I'm really delighted to have the powerhouses in the digital space. Let's start with the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Serbia has been in the forefront. In fact, the UN says that it is one of the 10 countries that have made the biggest stride in digitization. It's been a priority for you since you came to office. How has it been a productive use of the country's money?
It's been amazing journey since basically 2017. We have, we've done a lot of things, introducing coding and programming as mandatory subject in the primary schools, introduced specialized IT classes in the secondary schools, invested a lot of money into infrastructure just for startup innovation companies, building science and technology parks, changing legislation to enable tax incentives for companies investing in research and development, also for employing IT specialists, or bringing foreigners to Serbia to work from Serbia, special incentives for companies that bring our diaspora back to Serbia. And the results were amazing, I think, beyond what we ever expected. I'll tell you just two facts. One is 10 years ago, 2012, our IT export was 375 million, and this year is going to be over 2.6 billion, and that's just in 10 years. And in 2021, every second new job created in Serbia was in the IT sector. And for me, it's just the beginning. But you could see that, countries that weren't the winners of third industrial revolution could utilize this fourth industrial revolution, or what might be the fifth industrial revolution, with biotechnology to really excel and change the future for their citizens.
Just the beginning for Serbia, also just the beginning for India. I mean, Nandan, you spearheaded pretty much the other program, which is the digital biometric ID system. Now more than 1 billion people have access to it. How has it been a game changer for India?
Well, I think India is building actually a very, very good digital economy. And Aadhaar, of course, the project that I led, today 1.3 billion people have a digital ID, and they use it 50 million times a day to authenticate themselves for something or the other. You can use that to do a KYC or know your customer and get a mobile connection or a bank account in 2 minutes and so on. And then another thing which we did subsequently, with NPCI did, was to build a real-time interoperable payment system called UPI that last month did 7.3 billion transactions, over $1 trillion a year of transactions, and about 260 million people use that payment platform. And now we're looking at data empowerment, which allows people to use their own data. For example, small businesses can use their digital footprint to get credit. And then the latest thing is something called ONDC, which is the Open Network for Digital Commerce, which essentially allows everyone to participate in e-commerce as a buyer, a supplier, or as a logistics player. So fundamentally, it's a larger plan to create a digital economy which is equitable and which is inclusive, and which allows everyone to improve their lives with their digital footprints.
Just to put it out there, it was 13 years in the making.
That's right. I joined the Aadhaar project in the government in 2009, and I worked in the government for 5 years. And when I left, there were about 600 million people with ID. But then Prime Minister Modi has taken it forward. He's very big on digital technology. And I think so now we are really in a very good spot.
Strive, you're the man who said that you want to take Africa's digital economy to the fast lane. How do you plan to do that? What's the end goal?
Well, you know, a great idea always comes at the same time all over the world. So Africa is not outside what's going on elsewhere in terms of digital infrastructure. My business, for instance, we've been building fiber optic networks, data centers. We've built over 100,000 kilometers of fiber across Africa, north, south. Probably the only continent where a single company has done that. I don't think anyone did it in Europe or Asia or Latin America. Well, we did it in Africa. We built a fiber network that goes from Cape Town to Cairo, across the Sahara, to West Africa, through the Congo rainforest. Excuse me. We've been building data centers. And our industry from which I come from, you know, more than 800 million people in Africa have a mobile phone. 400 million of those are smartphones. We know we were the pioneers in mobile money, and we're beginning to transform that into a more sophisticated infrastructure. So Africa is also on this path, and we're excited.
Speaking of excitement, of course, for Grab, it is a fantastic place to be. You've gone from being a ride-hailing app to a super app. What was the thinking behind there?
Before I go there, can I just say that it's awesome to be the smallest fry on the stage, so thank you so much for enabling me to be here. But I think the thinking behind the evolution that we've had has always been similar to the vision that we started a company with, which is to really create, via technology, economic empowerment for this region that we love and call home. And the idea first started as a taxi-hailing app, but very soon we realized similar principles around creating a scalable platform could be used for much more than that. During COVID, food deliveries became the thing that was our number one priority because we had hundreds and thousands of driver partners that were relying on us, that suddenly had no income opportunities. We saw thousands and thousands of merchants throughout the region also struggling to make a living. So the reason why that underlying transition from ride-hailing to super app happened is because we're ultimately trying to create income opportunities via technology, which I think is what we all share here. And we believe as long as Southeast Asia succeeds, Grab succeeds. And for us right now going forward, we're very, very focused on a group of users that we call the everyday entrepreneurs, which is a combination of MSMEs, micro, small, medium entrepreneurs, which in this region is critical because it represents like 97% of all businesses here. So it's a key economic driver and also employer for the region. And secondly, this new industry that we all now call the gig industry, which we also consider as entrepreneurs because they own their own P&Ls and they own their own business and time. Yep. So for us, what we're trying to do is take the silver linings from COVID. COVID came with a lot of downsides. It was not a great period, but it came with one silver lining where digitalization accelerated tremendously. And so what we are trying to do right now is make sure we don't lose the momentum from all that value that has been created, while also ensuring that this new value is distributed as broadly and sustainably as possible, because inequality in this current environment is now becoming very, very real. So with tooling, technology, that's what we're hoping to do.
We always talk about how we want to use technology to level the playing field, to create a more inclusive society. Truth of the matter is that there are always those marginalized. There's always the risk that inequality will persist or even deepen as a result of technology. Prime Minister, how are you addressing that issue, ensuring that there's a level playing field, everybody is included?
Well, firstly, I think obviously the internet access is a number one thing, and if you think about the 21st century, I think that having internet access has really become like one of those basic human rights, and I don't think that I'm, in any way exaggerating this. It has been. I mean, if you look at, for example, one of my key priorities was introducing e-government. So, I didn't see any point in living in the 21st century and still having to physically go and wait at some counter to do something, and pick up papers from one office to the next to bring them to the government to get another paper, So paperless government, e-government was a way for me to influence the efficiency of the government, transparency, also fight corruption. But if you introduce e-government, then you have to make possible for all of the citizens to have access to that e-government. And that is why I think, as Tribe said, I think that is amazing. I think that everyone should have internet access in the 21st century and that we should all invest into it. Our goal is that by 2025, 100% of population in Serbia has access to broadband. And then the next thing, so that no one is left behind, is certainly education. And I think, the computers are becoming less and less expensive. I think it will be down to the state to buy a computer to each pupil in schools, so we don't have textbooks, we have digital textbooks. We pay for licenses for those textbooks. I think these are some of the basic things that we need to do as governments, and then obviously the private sector will also take it forward.
As entrepreneurs, like three of our speakers here, how are you looking at the issue, Strive?
Well, it's all in the numbers if you think about it. I said in this forum in 2018, if I remember right, when I came into the mobile industry in 1994, 0.075% of the African people had a mobile phone, had ever heard a telephone ringing. Today, I used to say 75%. But actually, the number of mobile phones in Africa today now exceeds 100% of the population. Okay, so if that's not inclusion, I don't know what is. 5 years ago, less than 2% of the African population had a bank account. Today, more than 250 million people have bank accounts because of digital investment by the private sector, by entrepreneurs. So that's how we get inclusion. It requires us as entrepreneurs to develop solutions that bring the masses of the people into play. Many people have looked at Africa and said, well, how can people who live on less than $2 a day be a market? Well, they are. They are a market. And they will be the world's largest market at the turn of this century. 40% of the world's population will be Africans. Mm. So we're waiting for you. If you're in business, you need to be in Africa because you can't miss 40% of the world's population.
And you heard it first at the New Economy
Forum. So you heard it first here.
Ling?
Yeah, so this concept of providing access and leveraging infrastructure from the amazing governments that we work with, critical for us. And let me try and use this, use a tangible example for us on how we're trying to empower, again, MSMEs and everyday entrepreneurs, right? The concept I think about is providing a digital business in a box for them. Because if you're a mom and pop star owner, you don't really know how to create a website, to go start getting sales. You don't really have any idea whether you should be hiring drivers to be your distribution network? How do you think about, SEO and ads and marketing to create a digital footprint that you can create, business and drive revenue from, right? This is not something that they are skilled at, know how to do, or even want to do at certain points in time. But thanks to, again, COVID, many of them actually realized they had to, and when they tried, it was easy. And that's because they had services like Grab that they could lean on to get that digital business in a box service. And one of the stories I'm thinking about right now, I can literally see her store in my head because I'm a visual thinker, is Bu Siska. She's a vegetable store owner in a wet market in Jakarta. So think about this really small store, somewhere in a wet market, multiple floors, like the floors are kind of wet. You go there if you live nearby. It's not a tourist attraction, but it's kind of what enables her to put money into food and her kids through school. During COVID, everybody, likewise globally, was struggling to figure out how to survive without anybody being able to go in and drive foot traffic and revenue for them. So she signed up for Grab. Before this, had no need to, no inkling to, and actually thought it was potentially scary. Why? Digital business. But as part of that, she now tells that story with such pride because even post travel restrictions, releasing, everybody going back to normal work, and folks actually going back to the markets to buy food, her Grab online transactions now represent 90% of all of her revenue.
Wow.
And just to illustrate what this is a wet market store owner. Her Grab online revenues represent $15,000 US dollars per month of revenue she never had access to before. So you can imagine why whenever she sees Anthony and I, she goes crazy happy. And this, to be honest, makes us crazy happy as well, because we've heard so many of these stories that truly is the reason why we are doing what we're doing, right? Because there's so many more Bu Siskas in the region globally that we think all they need is the right access to the right tools, after which they will actually learn what to do.
New growth model, new economic model, and you say, right, Nandan, that the biometric system allows for that to happen.
Yes, I think we need to think of this at several levels. Obviously, at one level, connectivity is very important, and everybody must have access to a mobile phone, a smartphone, and cheap data. So that's one thing, and people like Strive, and in India, people like Jio and Airtel have done that, so that's one part of it. The other is financial access. Everybody must have a bank account. In India, in the last few years, 700 million new people have had bank accounts, all done through this infrastructure. A third thing is identity, having a digital identity which they can take with them anywhere. So if you have identity, a phone, and you have a bank account, then you have the three basic instruments to move forward in life. Now, when you start doing these transactions, you generate digital footprints, digital exhaust. Now, if there's a way you can leverage that to get access to services, then you have created an inclusive development model. So you can have this small vendor who does transactions. The transactions create digital access. That creates data, which can then be used to parlay it for a loan, what's called as information collateral. So that's one part. The other thing is that I think all the countries in the region have to go from informal to formal economy. So what this digital economy is doing is accelerating the process of formalization. So people who are outside this system come into this system. Now, historically, people haven't come into the system because they're worried about taxes and so on. But if coming into the system gets you access to services like better credit, then you will join the system. So we are seeing formalization. And once you have formalization, then the state has better tax returns, a tax income, which then can pay for public services. So there's a whole sort of theme here on inclusion, driving economic growth, driving formalization, driving better state finances. And I think that's the journey that countries will have to make.
Is that the journey that Serbia is taking?
Absolutely. I'll tell you another area where I think globally digital will play even bigger and more important role, and that's agriculture. I mean, I think a lot of countries tend to forget that because of, different things, and climate change being one of the most important ones. the digital agriculture is really going to be the only sustainable solution and for efficient and sustainable agriculture. So everything that has to do with smartphones, I mean, I see farmers in Serbia using smartphones more and more to look at their crops. They can get, anytime day or night, a satellite vision of their crops. They can see if something's wrong. They get fed information on what's wrong and how to remedy it. And we will have to do it more and more because, I mean, at the end of the day, because of the climate change, you won't be able to harvest the same things that your grandparents did. And I think, there is so much potential in new growth models in each and every sector that really, I mean, the job of the government is to help the private sector to realize this and then create conditions for this to be successful, basically.
Strife?
Absolutely. I'm always excited about agriculture. I always say if I came back again at 25, I'll have a shot at farming. And it's the digitization side. I'll give you an example. One of our companies developed after my visit to Grab. So I came here in 2018, and I met Tony here. And after doing our panel together, I visited you guys. And I thought about this Grab platform. I went back and I told my guys, we need to look at this. But instead of doing urban transport, we developed a similar platform for tractors. Because there aren't enough tractors in Africa. So people now just call up a tractor.
It's amazing.
So you can take these platforms, these digital platforms, the sort of things that's going on in agriculture. And what's exciting is people like Google. I had a presentation the other day from a team at Google doing extraordinary work in terms of agriculture, particularly now with the climate change. We need smart solutions around water, around crop challenges for the crops themselves, soils, and so forth. So we're only just getting started, because remember, the global south is where the majority of the people live, and we are in the global south.
Just to add one sentence, I mean, if you think about modern, efficient, sustainable agriculture, it has become, all of it has become about robots taking earth samples, soil samples, robots, satellites, smartphones, and big data analytics, so AI. It's unbelievable. I'm happy to say that in Serbia we have European Center of Excellence for Digital Agriculture. It's called Biosense Institute. So that's how I know all of these things. But it really is. I mean, if you look at Africa, the potential that digital agriculture has to address the future challenges in terms of food supply, hunger. With digital agriculture, I'm sure that Africa could feed the whole world.
The next level of innovation at Grab, you think?
In terms of identity, agriculture, no, I think there are much smarter people in the panel to solve it. I think for us, it's actually Strive gave a fantastic illustration, which is ultimately the platform and technology capabilities that we're building can be used and expanded into many different use cases. And once you build a core set of capabilities, whether it's KYC or loan origination capabilities using new information that previously was not available because it was in the informal economy, you can actually start to create really net new business models. And that's what we've been doing with microfinancing, microinsurance, right? Really, again, similarly replicating everything that has already been shared, finding new ways to distribute and create wealth for previously underserved segments. And I know a lot is being talked about in the news and media about, Web3 or metaverse and whatnot. To me, I think those technologies are really, really cool. But for us, what really matters more is what is the biggest problem that we, 600 plus million folks in Southeast Asia are currently facing, and what is the most relevant technology to solve that problem. And at this point in time, it's actually still very much smartphones, AI, ML, accessibility, upskilling, finding ways to make UI and UX easy to understand for a group of individuals that did not get the same kind of education that software developers did. Like, all of these are very real, high-value opportunities that actually very, very accessible, readily information and technologies haven't yet fully solved. And till it's solved, we'll continue trudging down that path.
We talk a lot about putting everything, all the services on digital, but there are risks. If you take a look at how, when companies pulled out of Russia, the common people couldn't access the banks, they couldn't use their cards to travel on the transportation system. How are you looking at those risks, and how do you mitigate those risks? Nandan?
No, I think there are different kinds of risks. I think one risk is privacy risk, because as more and more data of yours goes online, then somebody's probably figuring out what you do. So there's a privacy risk, which we find even with social media apps or whatever. So that's one risk. The second is the whole cybersecurity challenge. And with cybersecurity becoming an instrument of global warfare in some sense, you have to worry about where these attacks will come from. And the third is the geopolitical angle, which is if technology itself is going to be weaponized, then countries are going to say, I can't afford to use some other technology, I'll build my own. So I think there are different kinds of things happening, and we have to deal with that. But that still does not take away from the fact that we have to have the right digital economy or society to make this work. And I just want to add that, to give you a scale of, I think, in India in startups. In 2016, India had 1,000 startups. Now we have 90,000 startups. So that's a massive increase. And they're all solving all the problems that we're talking about. So I think the best thing is that you need to have an overall strategy and architecture. The government has to put in digital rails, which everybody can use, and connectivity, and then you have to allow innovation to happen on top of that. If you get this mixture right, then you can build a very advanced digital economy.
Strive?
No, I couldn't agree more. At the end of the day, speaking of Africa, we are still 55 independent sovereign nations. We are not a country. We do happen to coordinate better as countries than everybody else, but which is nice. When we call an African Union meeting, everybody pitches up. So I guess we could share a few stories. But when it comes to privacy, we as entrepreneurs play by the rules of the country. African countries, when Nelson Mandela came out of prison in 91, if I remember correctly, there were only 7 African countries that held regular elections. For the last 15 years, less than 7 African countries don't hold regular elections. In just the next 12 months, at least 600 million Africans will vote. So we are a massive democracy. So we have to accept that in each country, the will of the people and their legislators is what governs us. So, and I don't think these things are mutually exclusive at all. It's not an either or. So we build, countries demand data residency, so we build data centers for them. They demand total privacy for their nationals. We do that. We're entrepreneurs. We play by the rules of the country.
Ning?
Building on top of what Strive mentioned, actually, I want to reflect a change that I've seen in the last few years in the relationship between private and public entities, government regulators, and let's say technology platforms like ours, that I personally think has been extremely positive, which is the willingness to actually, work as one team and figure out the broader concept of what should privacy regulations be, cybersecurity, whatever regulations it is. I've been sensing a much stronger willingness to actually have open conversation before final decisions are made. Because, and that to me is tremendous, because all of us have blind spots. And we've also been doing this very tangibly, for example, let's say, with so many different sandboxes right now, with different central banks like MAS and financial institutions like us as well, where that concept and mental model that we know we need to experiment, we need to learn, iterate, fail together, is actually a very refreshing one that I think, as long as we continue doing, will be fantastic for every citizen that we serve. And actually, let me give you an example, another one during COVID, because all of our stories recently are from the COVID period, right? Where also the government in Indonesia was trying to figure out how they could effectively and scalably distribute COVID-related funds for the segment that was most impacted by the lockdowns, right? They're trying to distribute training, upskilling funds. And how do you do so? By making sure you actually give it to the people who deserve it and you want to target, and doing it without having to get lots and lots of people to go into brick and mortar banks, government agencies, and become, COVID super spreader events. Well, you leverage technology. And in that situation, they realized that we already had access to the majority of the user base that they wanted to touch. And via working together, we've actually now upskilled more than 14 million Indonesians and distributed funds to that targeted group. And we know that the money reached the hands of the individuals that we wanted because of digital identity, because of these new platforms that now enable us to reach out to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 citizens as easily as we could in capital cities.
Before I get the perspective from the Prime Minister, of course, you can submit your questions if you want your questions posed to any of our speakers. Just send it to us online, of course. Prime Minister, your thoughts on cybersecurity and privacy, especially, amid views that there could be an overreach of government using data in the way that it wants to?
Well, I have to say that I thought long and hard about this, because it was one of the biggest criticisms of e-government and doing everything electronically and having, all of the citizens' data, analyzing that data the way you see not fit but needed to provide hopefully better services to your citizens. And I'll tell you, at the end of the day, I think that nowadays citizens' data are certainly better protected than before. I mean, at least now, when you have all of your citizens' data electronically kept in some, state-of-the-art data center that we have built, for example, in Serbia for those purposes, it's all transparent. And, as the Prime Minister or anyone else in the government or whoever can't really just access mine data, your data, if there is a trail of that. So that data is protected. Whereas before, when it was in a paper form, in some municipality, in some office, anyone could come, look at it, copy it, use it, misuse it, and you wouldn't even know who did it. I mean, it was impossible to figure out who did it. So I think that today, the privacy is much, much better protected. And I think especially because, it is so closely, there is such a close oversight of it. People really wouldn't dare to misuse the data in that respect. Before, it wasn't an issue, and you just assume that, because it's in a paper form in some government office or local government office, it was safe. it wasn't. So I think in that respect, we are much, much better off today than where we used to be 10 or 20 years ago.
Did you want to add something, Strive?
No.
We have 2 minutes to go, so I just wanted the views on the final question from all the speakers.
I'm smart enough never to go after a prime minister.
You can disagree if you want, Strive. Your chance.
You should live in Serbia.
You know, as we look towards the future, that digital economy, what excites you the most? If you take a longer-term perspective, right, 5, 10 years down the road, what excites you the most? Ling, we'll go down the line.
No, I think the fact that more and more folks are actually looking to solve real problems with technology and really trying to solve this problem of inequality, as this panel actually has reflected to me, is very, very encouraging. And as long as we all keep working hard and don't ban each other from going to each other's countries, backstage jokes here, I think there's a lot to be excited about in the future.
I think we have an opportunity to create a new model of growth, which is equitable, which is digital enabled, and where everybody it's inclusive and allows everyone to carve out their own space and leverage their own abilities to the best of what they can do. And I think we are not far away from achieving that.
So for India, when's that going to be?
In the next decade.
Okay. Strive?
Look, most exciting thing is I look at what happened in China 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And now I look at what's happening in India. And I say, Africa, here we come. All the fundamentals of China 20 years ago, Africa has today. Just don't forget that. We're already 2.5 trillion in our economy. Pre-COVID, we were running 5% per annum. We are coming. So, see you in Africa.
Prime Minister.
I think, yes, going forward, I think for Serbia, the two next big things is, utilizing artificial intelligence for further growth of our economy, as well as to provide better services to our citizens, and biotechnology, because I think, I would love to see us going much faster towards personalized medicine, because I think, when you're a prime minister, you look at your budget, you look at the money you spend on the healthcare, and you still look at so many people that can't access the cutting-edge medicine to save their lives or their children's lives, and investing in biotechnology to resolve that problem and heartache of your people, and you can utilize technology for that, is a big challenge. I think it has so many big gains to be won by all of us.
Prime Minister Brnabić, Strive, Nandan, Ling, thank you so much for being so insightful and so candid today. Thank you for joining us.
Please welcome our panellists, co-founder and chief executive officer of Sila Nanotechnologies, Jean Berdichevsky. Founder and executive co-chairman of Ivanhoe Mines, Robert Friedland. Founder and managing director of TIG Africa and chief executive officer of Downforce Technologies, Josephine Wapakabalu. And our moderator, executive editor of Bloomberg News, David Papadopoulos.
Hello, good afternoon, Jean, Robert, Josephine. Thank you for joining us. What you guys will notice that we've done here, and it's really quite clever, is we took all the long and difficult to pronounce last names and we put them in the same panel, right? So the only one I've got down is Papadopoulos. I've got that one down cold. We've got a poll, and we're gonna, and I want to make sure you guys take our poll, and we're going to get the answers later. The poll, just to remind you, the question is, what should the top development priority be for resource-rich countries? A, sustainability, protecting the environment and slowing climate change is everyone's job. B, capturing more of the value by processing and manufacturing resources domestically. C, maximizing economic growth no matter what the cost. We will look at the answers later, and we're going to build to that issue as we go along. I want to initially, though, I want to take a little bit of a sober look at the reality of energy and metals and the developing world. And I want to start with you, Josephine. You know, I know that you talk about how in Africa there are 600 million people who lack access to energy. And I detected when we spoke the other day a bit of frustration about some of the pressures that are being put on Africa as they look to develop that energy. What are global leaders getting wrong?
So first of all, great to be on this panel and have this discussion. I think I've mentioned this before, but there's a saying in one of our African tribes that if you're last to the bar, make sure you don't pay the bill. And in some instances, there's that sense that there's been economies that have been enjoying the benefits of oil, gas, coal for 150, 160 years, industrialized, developed, and then you've got newer economies in parts of Africa and other parts of the world that are looking to enter this space to meet pertinent energy demand and needs, 600 million people, population growth 2 to 3% a year across the continent. But the signals that you get from the industry or from sort of Western economies is we have a climate problem, which we all accept. We have climate goals that we all need to achieve, but we're sort of being put on the same position on the race. You know, we're all being asked to sort of stop the tap at the bar at the same time. And yet the reality is that as much as we all have the same goals, the reality and the realistic path to achieve those goals is going to vary. And so sort of having a more realistic and pragmatic approach to the fact that we will need longer with some of these traditional energy sources. We will absolutely do renewable energy. But then the frustration that a lot of the resources used in renewable energy come from the continent. There's huge demand, so we're at the end of the queue in terms of supply chain and receiving that renewable energy. We're being asked to pull back on traditional fuels or pay a premium. So there's this general feeling of where do we win on this story? So
you know, you worked in oil and gas and now have various green projects, and you told me it's way harder in Africa, harder than we want to acknowledge to get green projects off the ground. Why?
Demand is far outstripping supply. That's just the reality across the globe. And so when you look at, for example, a lot of battery storage, the biggest issue I saw when we were delivering EV projects was the lead times with particularly battery storage technologies, regardless of which one you were using. So we're told, come on, scale, go fast with solar, power, wind. It can happen in a, let's go big. This is Africa's opportunity. Okay, if I'm waiting 9 months for my sort of lead times just for my battery storage, good luck. It's not going to happen. And so when you get these sort of very emotive big statements, the answer is renewable energy. I know you've never delivered a project because the reality is, particularly on supply chain, particularly with battery storage, once again, a lot of which elements come from the continent, they take so long because you've got this huge demand in the EV world, smartphones. You
feel like you're last in the queue.
Yeah, last in the queue.
I wanted to go to Robert for a second because on on the metals front. And by the way, Robert is the man in this room who's long metals. All the rest of us are short metals, right, effectively. Robert, tell us just how short are we collectively, the world? How short metals are we?
So what Josephine was talking about is very important because she raised the mystical concept of the supply chain. Maybe it's the latest buzzword, but everything we touch, we either grew it agriculturally or we mined it. Yeah. And in this particular room, all these bright lights and all this technology is dependent on mining. Mm-hmm. And we live in a world where she's right. We burned Saudi hydrocarbon for 50 or 80 years and built the modern world. Mm-hmm. And it was built on a huge amount of potentially global warming gas, and you can't go to the developing nations that have the resources and tell them they can't develop themselves. This is a huge mega issue. So the supply chain now runs largely through Africa and other developing countries, and it throws off a gazillion issues of how this is going to be approached philosophically, how it's going to be developed with native populations, what is in it for them, rather than seeing the benefit go to the capital city or a bunch of kleptocrats. The development has to be done in a whole new and more conscious way. And now we have the ability to track every raw material with blockchain technology and price it accordingly. Here in Singapore, we funded a startup called ABAX Technologies that will make a market based on ESG characteristics in all commodities, starting with LNG, but then all metals. And so the way we're talking here about womb to tomb, cradle to grave, sperm to germ. The whole system has to be rethought. Otherwise, we're just babbling and not being realistic. And so, you know, if you stopped all hydrocarbon production today, half the people in the world would starve to death because we wouldn't have the Haber process to make ammonium and fertilizer.
Right.
And on the other hand, there's a lot of energy required to mine and find these energy transition metals, and therefore we're happy to be here representing the revenge of the miners.
Right. This is the revenge of the miners. That's what.
Absolutely.
Well, Gene, I know you have a bit of a different take, and you are the resident optimist here on the stage. You're the tech entrepreneur. I know you're a tech entrepreneur. Optimist, a tech entrepreneur. You have a bit of a less dark outlook, and believe companies like yours can find solutions. How does that play out on a large enough scale to make a meaningful impact and move the needle?
Yeah, so I do think there's opportunity for technology to accelerate the transition even further. Today, the energy transition is largely limited by the availability of nickel and lithium more than anything. Robert's going to find more for us. But, you know, and that's already a tremendous success in decoupling the energy layer of society from scarce natural resources like oil, coal, and gas. This is a tremendous improvement. There's nickel in more places. There's lithium in more places. It can be had at economic levels. And so I think we've had a breakthrough. The next set of breakthroughs technologically is going to be moving away from the more scarce minerals. So, you know, our technology, for example, replaces the graphite and lithium-ion batteries, which is mined, with a silicon-based anode material, which can be produced on any continent where there's low-cost energy. And so that further decouples you from the natural resource. And then on the other portion of the battery that uses a lot of nickel, you know, there are technologies that are probably end of this decade that can move away from nickel and cobalt to more copper and iron, which is dramatically more abundant. And so, you know, technology continues to decouple the energy layer of society from natural resources, and I think every nation, every region deserves to have an energy independence from other geopolitical areas. And I think, you know, in the next, now it'll take a couple decades, so I'm not an optimist in the next few years, but the price signals on nickel and lithium are such that I expect a lot more projects will get developed. A lot of things that weren't economic before for Robert and others will become economic.
Now, it's interesting as the poll results come in, and my eyesight's failing me here a little bit, but I'm pretty darn sure, if I'm saying this correctly, that sustainability, protecting the environment and slowing climate change is everyone's job, is overwhelmingly winning this vote here over capturing more of the value by processing and manufacturing resources domestically. And what's interesting about that is A is probably best for the world, the developed world and everyone. But B, Josephine, is probably best, right, for the resource-rich countries, right, the more of a go-slow approach. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and again, it's like I said, we all have the same goal.
Right.
We all have the same goal. What the challenge is, we're expecting everyone to do it at the same rate.
Right.
Right. And so what I believe, and I know others agree, is it's a conversation of, we know fossil fuels will still exist for a long time. The question is who will use more, for how long, and who will use less. We shouldn't make it an either or. We know renewable energy is a phenomenal sort of breakthrough. Let's use that, but let's be realistic on how quickly that can scale. Let's not live with our heads in the sand hoping it's a silver bullet.
And what about also the idea of bringing the value add? Because I think, part of the, fostering growth in these countries is about demanding more of that value add, be brought to the ground. And I think in a world in which the Congo, for instance, has the vast bulk of cobalt, and Chile dominates lithium, and a handful of countries have strangleholds on those.
The debate, this is the debate of the ages. You get, there's no skill, there's not reliable energy, you don't have the transportation infrastructure. You get the same arguments when the forums I've been where there's this debate, you sort of land on those same arguments. If you don't have the skill, you don't have the, so it's like, but that's the point. If we made the hard decision to do that investment, and it will take time, that is the pathway to industrialization, development, using the realistic energy sources. But the conversations I'm being in, I'm hearing the same arguments and not much change on that front.
Got it. And Robert, if that means the metals get extracted at a slower pace, is that still a net positive for all the players involved?
So let's just start with setting the stage for what a serious problem we face. As humanity, we've mined 700 million tons of copper since we emerged from caves in recorded history. To maintain 3% GDP growth for the 8 billion people on this little ball of iron and silica hurtling through space, we need to mine that much copper in the next 24 years, absent electrification.
So electrification comes on top of that.
On top of that. And copper inventory right now is the lowest we've seen in decades. And it takes a prodigious amount of capital to build a copper mine, let alone find one, and then to operate it in a green and responsible way. In other words, to produce very little global warming gas in that process, and then to hire local people and add value locally, means that the whole sort of caveman's enterprise of mining has to be reinvented from top to bottom. In Africa, we have women doing the mining and running the organization, and the software around the hardware. If the mine is the hardware, the software, the community development, the schools, the hospitals, the internet, the broadband, all around it, to find a way to make the mine sustainable. Because if the locals are opposed to the mine, every hand phone is an NGO.
Right. So on that, I wanted to ask Josephine and Jean to comment on something. Robert told me this the other day, and I didn't get a chance to verify it myself, but it feels factual, so I'm going to go with it. Which is that he says that at the top mines engineering school in the U.S., you'll find the following bumper stickers: "Stop mining, let the bastards freeze in the dark," and "Earth first, we'll mine the rest later." So at the same time, you do see protests growing in many parts of the world, the U.S., in Serbia, in South America. What is that telling us? What, if anything, needs to be fixed here? I mean, as Robert's saying, we need the metals.
I think it's very short-sighted, right? And in the U.S., right, we're having this debate right now of what permitting is going to look like for bringing metals out of the earth. And if we make permitting and mining so difficult, it's just going to happen somewhere else in the world, and it's going to happen at a lower environmental standard. And so, you'll do more damage to the overall environment. I think it's very sort of myopic and self-centered to take that view. I think it's much better to say, look, there is a certain standard that we're going to uphold. We're going to make sure that kind of permitting and the requirements are clear. We're going to enforce those domestically, and then we're going to expect things imported from other countries to meet that same standard. And I think that's, not only a more practical approach, it'll actually end up moving faster because businesses will appreciate the predictability.
Yeah, Josephine.
Yeah, no, and look, you know, sort of talking more positives. There's been
Positive.
Yeah, there's been lessons learned,
Yes.
right, from the past. And when I was running the national oil company, one of the things that we recognized is, you know, that shift to try and bring the supply chain into these emerging economies. It's a major shift, and we don't necessarily have the time for that. But we saw when we were doing the development of our oil and gas, and now leading into sort of production, when you focus on goods and services going into these sectors.
Right.
So we ring-fenced certain goods and services had to have over 70% local content, and then some had to be in
Did that work?
It did, and we saw during our exploration phase, where it was about $8 billion worth of investment, we audited and found 30% of that stayed in the local economy. Now, the full development phase we're going into now is about 20 billion. Even if we stayed at that 30%, for a country that has 36 billion GDP, that 6 billion makes a difference.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, sometimes you just got to look at it differently and say, look, are we going to get the specialists who can do the really high-end technical stuff trained in time and skilled with all the infrastructure and logistics? Probably not. Can we start through legislation, policy, and regulation style, pulling in some of those earlier goods and services, supplying the industry to more local supply chains? We can do that, and we've seen that work.
Got it. Robert, there's lots of chatter out there about the next OPEC, right? And there's going to be OPEC of lithium, OPEC of cobalt, OPEC of fill in the blank. Is that reality really coming? And if so, what would the impact be? How does that play out?
No, I don't think so. The first iPhone that you held in your hand had about 35 elements in the periodic table. If you have an iPhone 13, about 85 elements in the periodic table, all of which have to come from somewhere.
Right.
But there's so much disinformation in the popular media. For example, rare earths. They're not rare, and they're not earths. They're common metals. They're salts that exist all over the world.
You're proposing we change the name to common metals?
No, I think that we're very well blessed in all the elements in the periodic table, without bothering to mine the other planets later. On this one, it can be done. Right. It's just that the software around the hardware enterprise of mining has to be completely rethought. Its relationship with native communities, developing countries, how it's done. And this takes a really profound rethinking. And the United States is not blessed in everything. China is deficient in many things they critically need. And so sometimes the availability of a particular technology will be different in one country or another based on what they may have in the raw material supply chain. But this supply chain issue is of monumental importance as we balkanize the world economy. In 2008, we were sort of working on a just-in-time integrated world economy. And then the Donald, amongst others, sprinkled salt on that idea, and now we've broken the world up. And a lot of these critical raw materials are in one area or another. Getting them across, the Japanese need their own supply chain, the Koreans need their own supply chain, the Europeans want their own supply chain. This is insanely inflationary as we break down a just-in-time world economy. And that exacerbates how serious this question is of looking at the entire supply chain for anything.
So that's the resource nationalism of one kind, which is resource nationalism on the demand side. I want to make sure that I have enough for my country, and so every country for themselves. There's also the resource nationalism, though, which gets back a little bit to the OPEC of idea from the suppliers. And the region I know best is Latin America. And I saw, where resource nationalism, state-driven models, and the inefficiencies they bring. Latin America today produces barely 10 million barrels of oil a day. I think it's a proven fact that if the ingenuity of the fracking industry, not that the technology is the same, what were in place in Latin America, you'd be at least double that. And I guess I wonder can the world afford, Josephine, those inefficiencies that come with the state-driven model, or do we need more Jeans and Roberts out there making it happen?
everyone has to play their part, right? You can't single out one element from this puzzle. We need private sector, we need government, we need we even need civil society. You know, we need financial institutions. We need those regional bodies like the African Union and other areas to come in and sort of find that right balance, right? Because no one has the full picture, but what challenges that sometimes is sort of these external pressures on this climate goal, which is important, that seems to skew the discussions and the narrative away from practical achievement of these goals to headline-grabbing, emotive statements and decisions that, you know, the pipeline that we negotiated for East Africa, we had EU parliamentarians criticizing a pipeline going across 2 African countries that's going to have employment, revenue, and opportunity. Not saying we'll be perfect, but that kind of, you know, I just feel that often the sort of pragmatic conversation is hijacked by an important issue and taking away from pragmatic, realistic implementation.
I know there's something you were excited about, this creation of the, I believe it's called the African Energy
Transition Bank, which is Afro-Exim and the Africa Petroleum Producers Organization have come together. I think it was in May they did the announcement. So that excites me, that this sort of taking ownership of the narrative to say we need to fund traditional fuels, fossil fuels, for a longer period than most to get to levels of industrialization and development that are good for the 600 million who don't have it and the many who are coming from our birth rate. So it excites me that there's sort of this initiative from the African banks.
Right. Robert, I believe you at some point looked at it as it's a little bit morally questionable indeed to say, hey, you know, Africa, keep your hands off the, you know, oil and gas, right? Is that, especially, you know, what is the population growth rate in Africa, Nancy?
Depending on which country, anywhere from 2 to 4%.
Right. What's your view?
The African continent has 1.4 billion people. It's equivalent to a China. Who are we to lecture that they can't use their own resources to have a better life?
Right.
So, and actually where we're really critically dependent is we're critically dependent on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And if you don't understand that, I'm sorry, but if they can't maintain energy stability there, we're finished. You've seen all those Iranian drones bombing civilian populations in Ukraine? If those drones were turned on the Jebel petroleum complex in Saudi Arabia, crude oil would be $300 a barrel overnight. Price of food would explode in the developing world. So we're living in a very dangerous and fragile moment. If you look at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they have all this cash flow from crude oil, but they're investing in technology to transform their economy. The Russians have an equal amount of crude oil, and they're not doing the former. Instead, they're spending it on weaponry. And every time a bomb or a shell goes off in Ukraine, that's copper and antimony, for example, that's not being recycled. So we can use metals for war, or we can use metals to make a better life for our grandkids.
Now, on that point, because I know when you were looking at the landscape for demand for metals, militaries indeed across the world are getting more involved on the demand side. What does that look like?
So you guys just have to understand the incredible degree of responsibility on the mining industry to come up with the metals to enable an energy transition. That's an enormously difficult, capital-intensive thing to do. Terribly capital-intensive. But now we have the Army, Navy, and Air Force of most political entities want to rearm and build up armaments. The Germans didn't have an army worthy of the name post-World War II, and suddenly they're freaked out and want to spend a $100 billion down payment. What do you think an army is made out of? It's made out of metals. You know, what is an armaments made out of? The Soviet cannons, the barrels explode after they're shot a few times because they cheated on the metallurgy. So even the Dutch want to increase their percentage of their national budget for the military. The Americans, the Chinese, this movement towards remilitarization will grab the metals we need for the energy transition and exacerbate the fundamental problem.
So, Jim, basically, get your manufacturing cranked up faster. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, the answer to a lot of these challenges is technological. It is creating substitutes to the technologies that we have today. You can develop substitutes, and then different regions can develop with the resources they have on different technological paths, right? So in some regions, hydrogen will play a much bigger role than energy storage. Ammonia will play a big role in other regions. And so I think the answer is to continue that technological innovation curve that gives us more options. Rare earth metals, which are, have been hard to come by, can be supplanted with next generation magnets that give you the performance of rare earth magnets without the scarce minerals, right? Yeah. And so there's a role for technology to play to unlock different development paths for different regions and to sort of ease we no doubt need the miners to make this transition, but we'd like to need them as little as possible.
So Robert can stay. He can stay on stage. Robert's good? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, on that innovation side, I sit on the board of a company now where we're developing a 25-year life battery using compressed air, recycled car engines, and reusable oil and gas equipment. And it's really exciting out of a university in the UK. So I completely agree. Technology is our friend, and innovation is our friend.
Gene, a.k.a. Gretzky over here, told me that he skates to where the puck will be, not where it was. What is that? What does that Mr. Gretzky look like exactly?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I look towards a world, I think about this transition taking several decades, and there's a couple of things I know for sure. All ground transportation will be electric in my lifetime, guaranteed. And I think by the time we get to, let's say, 2040, 2050, and most of the global fleet, not the new cars, but the existing cars on the road are electric, we start to approach a world where you aren't pulling very much nickel out of the ground anymore. You aren't pulling very much lithium out of the ground anymore. Way to think about it is we need to charge the global economy once with the nickel, the lithium, the copper that we need. And so, in many ways, compared to a fossil fuel age where you have to pull out, 88 million barrels of oil every single day just to keep the lights on, we get to a world where, towards the end of the century, maybe we don't need Robert and the mines.
You're dreaming.
On that note, we will wrap. James, Robert, Josephine, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks, David.
Please.
All right.
Please welcome our panellists, Acting Chief Executive Officer of SABIC, Abdul Rahman Al-Fajr, Chief Executive Officer of Ekshore, Jenny Kaisu, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Ocean Cleanup, Boyan Slash, Co-Founder and Co-Chief Executive Officer of Allbirds, Joseph Zwillinger, and our moderator, anchor for Bloomberg Television, Francine Lacroix.
We have this very small topic about the circular economy. I mean, how big is the waste? Let's get straight to it because we have 40 minutes to try and figure out how 2.7 million tons of floating debris choking off ocean life in the Pacific can be resolved. So we talk about circular economy, we talk about recycling, and of course everything in between. So thank you so much to our all-star panel for joining us. So let me start with you. And I'm really looking forward to the panel because you all have different experiences. You all have different parts of the economy that you're trying to fix. What does this all mean for SABIC? You're a big chemicals company. How do you see this? And actually, when did you start thinking about the circular economy?
First of all, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for Bloomberg, to give us the opportunity to be among, distinguished, panelists here. We are not only a big company in chemicals, we are also a big company in sustainability. Actually, SABIC has been, established in 1976 as a sustainable company to collect all the flare gases that used to come with the oil and convert this into petrochemical products that we are seeing right now. So, like many years back, in our history, that we have a target for us in our sustainability. And part of it is we need to be zero carbon emission by the 2050. And we were believing in the circular economy, as the circular economy would have, a major contribution in that, zero carbon emission or carbon neutrality by the 2050. And we adopted what we call it the 4R rules, right, which is reduce, reuse, remove, and recycle. And we adopted programs for each one of them to make sure that we are reduce our emissions on an annual basis, and also we are removing it. And we are having a lot of alliances with a lot of waste management companies around the world to make sure that it is removed, and also it be reused. And also we adopted, new technologies and trying to find out what is the best solution that we use this recycled material into a feedstock as original material.
Jenny, what are you seeing in the oceans?
So just to take a step back from our perspective, so Xshore is committed to net zero boating. That entails that our high-performing electric boats that are out there already should not emit anything. But it also needs to be built out of 100% sustainable materials. It needs to be manufactured in a sustainable way. And then, of course, they should end up one way or another recycled or reused, etc. So this is a huge focus. And what we need is collaborators, because we will be building the first 100% net zero electric boat by 2030, and the technology is not yet there. So we need to collaborate with our full supply chain to get there all the way, and that's our current focus.
Boyan?
Yeah, so at the Ocean Clip, our mission is to rid the world's oceans of plastic, and we do that by cleaning up what's already in the ocean. So as we sit here, every 10 seconds, an area the size of a football field is being cleaned in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And we also try and stop more plastic from going into the ocean. So what we found is that 1,000 rivers emit about 80% of all the plastic going to the ocean. So by tackling those 1,000 most polluting rivers, we think we can have a major impact on the inflow. We're now in 10 rivers, but of course hope to scale up in the coming years.
Joey?
So we've thought about it as part of a system, and first of all, we make shoes. They're the most comfortable shoes in the world. Hopefully it'll be the last commercial I make, but it's allbirds.com or wherever you live. But we've set out, very similar to Jenny, when we started the company, we wanted to be an alignment around our purpose and our financial outcomes. So that is driving down carbon so that we can help reverse climate change, and doing that while making money. So if people buy our shoes, they're making a smart trade on whatever else they can buy. And the way that we've done this is to narrow it down to a singular metric that can be digested by consumers. And that is the carbon emissions for the full life cycle of the product, from farm in our case, all the way to the end of life. And if you get that score, and I took a run this morning, and I knew I was speaking, so I counted up the carbon on my clothes and my shoes. And we're all Allbirds stuff, and we label every single item with the carbon score. And so I had 24.7 kilograms of carbon dioxide emission equivalent in all of my garments: underwear, socks, shorts, shirts, shoes. And we have a plan to get that down to zero. And that will then drive this innovation, and you cannot get to zero if you're using virgin synthetics. And so we think about the inputs as the absolute most single high-impact priority that we can possibly do. And if we're driving that down to zero, it's going to force really interesting innovations. And so these shoes that I'm wearing now, it's our latest material that we've launched. It's a leather made out of exclusively plant oils with no plasticizers in it. Most of the alternatives to leather have a lot of plastic in it. And so this will biodegrade when you're done with it. And thinking about that overall system and driving that to zero ends up solving, if everyone kind of got on board, reducing the plastics. That doesn't mean that it's going to help eliminate them from the ocean, from the mess we've already made, but that's the way we think about it.
But it's also, Boyan, so so we've carefully selected the panel, of course, for people that believe and are trying to make a difference. But have you ever met a chief executive that says, actually, I don't care about this, I want to pollute more? And so how do you match up the two? Can you see who's polluting the most at the bottom of the oceans?
I mean, we do see certain brands on the plastic that we take out, of course. You only see, of course, the consumer goods companies, not the companies further down or further up in the supply chain. But yeah, I think companies, as a good friend of mine, Mark Benioff, always says, business is the greatest agent for change, and there's tremendous power in companies that can be used, good or bad. And I think companies have, with their own supply chain, a huge opportunity to do tremendous good, and that's why we also at the OceanClaim don't shy away from working with companies, because if that allows us to have a greater positive impact on the world, I think that's actually a very good thing.
Abdulrahman, when you look at the circular economy, of course, it's the idea that you trade up, right? You make a product that's higher value. Why is that more appealing than recycling? It's more expensive to do.
Yeah, definitely, but it's the recycled material that we are working on in SABIC, that we need to do a chemical recycling. What do I mean by this? It's not the mechanical one that it goes to, the secondary, applications and etc. It has to go back to the process itself to have the high end that goes to medical application, healthcare, automotive, aerospace application that really give a premiums for this. So we are working at technology right now that we can take all these waste plastics back to the original process, and it can go in the process as the original material. So this is one thing. The second thing, it also reduces our carbon emission. The more that you take out of this waste plastic, that means that you reduce the fresh material that you are going to use. By reducing this, you definitely reduce your carbon footprint. And we put in 2018 a baseline for us in SABIC that we need to reduce by the 2030, 20% of our footprint. And we start doing this. And we start doing the recycling. We start doing, a lot of, what I call it self-funded investment within our plants to improve our operation and our operational excellence to make sure that the emission is as low as we can. And I'm pleased that by the end of 2021, we have reduced 10% from the 2018 baseline, which is give us the confidence that by 2030, we are going to go to 20%, and hopefully also by the 2025 to be neutral.
Jenny?
Yeah, I think one thing that is important is, of course, we need to do this because by 2050 we will need 3 planets to sustain our current way of living. But it's also fair to point out that, we do make money out of this, and this will continue to be the driver. Of course, all of us want to save the planet, but investors need the return, etc. And one of the important things to realize is that there's so much new technology, so you can actually utilize this. So, for example, we have a large-size factory in Stockholm where we build our boats. When we moved in-house the production of the hulls, which is in essence the plastic we have, we reduced the amount of plastics that we had to use by 50%. That is a cost saving of 50%. This is huge from a financial perspective as well, and I think that needs to be pointed out that, reducing waste, reducing plastic, that is a huge upside. When we installed the ply cutting machines, we reduced the waste from 50% in manufacturing to less than 10%. And this goes directly to your bottom lines. This is also a reason why people should be doing this as companies.
Jerry, what kind of technology do you need actually to, help?
To get to our targets, we think we largely have the technology that we need. We've invested in a couple companies to get it done. I will say that, it may not be particularly popular in a circularity panel, but I would say that recycling synthetics and doing work to either downcycle them, which is typically the case with most polymer systems, at least when you're using polyester, the second time you use it, it's really not even close to as good. So it is not the direction that's going to work. So I would suggest the situation we're in now and why your work's so important is we have to look at it more like a turnaround situation. Like you look in a business that's really struggling, you have a mess that you got to clean up, but you need to fundamentally change the way that you're doing business. And so
that's hard.
It is hard, and that's where I do think that where I said it's difficult. I think in the chemical industry, which correct me if I'm misstating, but it's in a situation where there's a price taker from the co-products of fuel production, and On the other end, if it's a commodity, you also kind of sit there and take price, whatever the customer is going to pay on the commodity market. So it's difficult for a chemical company that's sitting as an intermediary to fully bear the burden of the change that needs to happen. So I do think this is where the real partnership needs to come in. And Marie earlier on a panel, I thought, alluded to some really good legislation that's coming out around carbon intensity of various products. So if we actually start to have companies like ours and Jenny's bear the burden of these externalities that are being pushed onto society, and really it's companies that exist out there right now that are privatizing the profits and socializing all these risks. So if we're going to do this turnaround situation, we do need to clean up the mess because we have a big problem, but we also need to fundamentally change who's bearing the cost of these problems. Eventually, it needs to be the consumer, and that needs to be guided by really smart policy based on energy intensity, and that will force plastics out of the ecosystem.
Abdulrahman?
I think forcing the plastic to be out of the system, I think this is something that it needs to be debated a lot. But I tell you what the problem is in the waste management of the plastic. There is no proper understanding and awareness of the public and how to, get rid of the plastic when they use it, especially for the, single-use plastic, because others can't be used for many years. But the single-use plastic, it has to have an appropriate, awareness and education to the people how to really, how to manage it well. And that need a lot of collaborations from governments, from NGOs, from producers, suppliers, supply chain. Everybody has to have a responsibility in order to make sure that this is not end up in ocean. Now we are talking about when it is in ocean, how can we clean it up? Okay, this is the reaction to the problem that it happens. So we should go to the root cause of the problem. Root cause of the problem, there is no inappropriate, management for the waste plastic. There are some countries or regions, like in Europe, for example, I think they do. They do some incentives for the people on how to have appropriate, waste management for the single use, like bottles and etc. But in other parts of the world, hardly that you see these incentives to people how to, manage this waste. So this is the problem. We start from the root cause and the waste management. Then in the cleanup, we are all, collaborating here, and I think we are doing a good job, in trying to clean this and trying to remove it and reuse it and recycle it, as I have mentioned in my starting statements here. But that takes time, of course. And definitely also by reducing the carbon emission, that contribute and help into the circular economy for sure.
But Boyan, what's the right? So we heard about incentives. What would actually make a real difference? Is it incentives? Is it punishment? Is it legislation? Is it simple, data transparency?
Yeah, I think it's to build on what the two of you just said. I do agree. Waste management is fundamentally the most important thing to prevent more plastic from going to the ocean. Right now, in the order of 400 million tons of plastic is being produced every year. What we see from our data, we published this in Science last year, is that roughly between 1 and 2 million tons of plastic is actually flowing into the ocean, which is somewhere between 0.25% and 0.5%. So most of the plastic actually does not end up in the ocean. So, and where it's being emitted, that's mostly in densely urbanized areas, close to the ocean in middle-income countries where people have enough wealth to consume stuff wrapped in plastic, but there's no public infrastructure yet to then collect the waste and put it in a safe place. However, of course, the problem is that waste management is quite expensive. Estimates vary, but it's somewhere between $600 billion and $1 trillion a year, which governments are spending on an annual basis to collect waste. So obviously, if the incentive structure is different for governments all the way to the consumer, I think that can really drive adoption of waste infrastructure as well as then making use of that infrastructure.
But that's what private-public partnerships. Again, how do you make sure that it has teeth, that whatever's put in place will be followed and it's just not an incentive?
Yeah. So just to name an example, so one river where we have our machines in to collect plastic is pretty close to here. It's the River Klang in Malaysia. Now, that river used to emit more plastic in a day than the biggest river in Europe does in a year. Now, in fact, there's more plastic being consumed in Europe than in Malaysia. But of course, the big difference is the quality of the waste infrastructure. So, public investments in that infrastructure, I think, is really the single most important thing.
Yeah. How do you deal with textiles, Joey?
From what perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about single-use plastics, but there's also a concern about textiles. Like, what are some of the? I mean, do you share technology, for example, with some of? I don't know if there's a global textile.
Yeah, textiles, I mean, they do contribute a ton to the plastic pollution, of course, given that most of them are from polyester in the way we make it. And I guess one of the things to maybe go back a little bit and answer your question at the same time, I think the idea of plastics doesn't necessarily have to be negative, but I do think shifting from plastics from petroleum to plastics from other green sources is going to be a frontier that really helps. And so you offered up a great question. Maybe you did great research. But the bottoms of our shoes are made from one of Abdul Rahman's competitor partners in Brazil called Braskem. And they take the waste stream from sugarcane production. We've co-developed this with them to put it into a green ethanol, then ethylene, and we take it and make a foam out of it. And so when doing that partnership with Braskem, we were too small to really rationalize an investment of many millions of dollars for them to connect their reactors in their plant in southern Brazil. So we said, let's do this. We'll strike a good business deal between us. We'll make the investment, and then we'll open source this to the rest of the industry. And so the idea there is we can compete vigorously for market share against all the other players in shoes, but we can collaborate when it comes to sustainability. And if we're successful doing that, there's a really nice win-win situation, particularly way upstream at this really capital-intensive end of the value system. When you're talking about building block chemicals, the capital intensity is way too high for someone in apparel making textiles or making shoes to bear that burden again. So collaborating across the industry is a vital aspect for, I think, how we need to make this recipe work.
Are they more expensive at the end of the day
Sometimes.
for the moment, and then they'll go down in price?
I mean, one of the beauty, if you take a long-term view, is it's based on a completely different feedstock. So it's based on sugarcane pricing and ethanol pricing, which is, of course, always tied to petroleum, as pretty much every commodity is. But it can be counter-cyclical. So sometimes we're paying less, sometimes we're paying more. And as more companies buy this green EVA, the foam that we make the shoes with, the price does come down dramatically. And so that we see a time when we can pay parity. For the moment right now, oil has come down significantly, and that has also made the gap a little bit more extreme.
What are you most excited in the technological space?
I'm excited about, the bio-based products, plastics. I think I'm not against anything here, but I think we need to look deeply and analyze whether these bio-based products, is it better that we convert it and direct it into the food, into the human needs, rather than industry? I mean, it could be both. We could have mixed, but is this the solution? I think there is more needs for these bio products, I think, somewhere else that could has priority in the humanity life.
But how difficult, again, and Jenny, I know you probably think about this a lot, how difficult is it to have technology now that works, that is sustainable, and then you realize 3-4 years that actually it had second and third round effects that are bad for the environment?
So if we look at what we need to get done, we will consume as long as we live on this planet. So we need to provide people with better products at the same price, and they need to be sustainable. So net zero is a key here, right? And it's not too far out. We just launched our second model, which is actually price parity, not including TCO, but just price parity. That's what we need to provide. It needs to be much better experience that it is already. We got the prize in Europe last year we came in second in Powerboat of the Year. We're electric, we're 3 years old. And so you have that. But what is tricky is the net zero part. You need to collaborate a lot. We have tons of collaborations out with different people and companies already where we will get biocarbon fiber, not too far out. We will very soon announce something about that. And bioglass fiber, I mean, you need all of that. And this is technologies that are just on the verge of, being commercialized at the moment. And as long as we pull together and show that there is consumers here, we're willing to take this on, those companies can grow. So I think going forward, as long as we collaborate and work this out together, we will fix that. What we need from you, what we need in terms of legislation is similar. I mean, if you look at Norway, they managed to get to more than 50% electric car in a very, very short period because the government took away the value-added tax on those products because they want the transition to happen. We just need super small incentives, and going forward, we will fix this. On the other hand, I mean, Bojan's project, we need help there because, I mean, everything that has been already done, I mean, we can't fix the history. We can do it going forward, but countries need to help with the legacy.
So I am getting questions, so thank you so much for those. I just want to make actually a very short question to everyone. Can everyone raise their hands who think that in the last 5 years there's been a huge shift in consumer demand for the circular economy? Are people ready to pay more actually to make sure that it's sustainable? I mean, that's about 70% of the room. And Joe, you see this, right, in demand for your products. Has it increased as people understand and get behind the story?
I think so. We're trying to understand how it's quite nuanced. We survey all of our customers all the time, and now 50% or more in the top 3 reasons they're buying our product has something to do with sustainability. So it's clearly on their minds. Now, I would contend that at the point of sale, people are still making a trade-off primarily on the tangible benefits of a product, price, quality, all that. What we've started to see a shift to is consumers starting to begin their selection of any kind of purchase with a subset of companies that they believe aligns with their values. And so it's that consideration set that starts. You're even seeing it in our industry in footwear. Zalando in Europe does a nice job of allowing consumers to filter based on different sustainability criteria. So it's a great example of how consumers are pulling on, hey, I want something that is more sustainable or has good rights for workers or whatever it is the issue that they think is the most important. And then maybe if it doesn't meet their needs on the value, on the price and the other qualities, they'll then expand it and consider a bunch of different legacy companies. And
Jenny?
I actually don't agree 100% with this. So I think that if you look at our consumers, a few of them are super into sustainability, but very similar to when Tesla came out, we have tons of customers who just want a better product. It's better UX, UI, it's amazing acceleration. They don't care about the environment, but they want the coolest boat. So we see that as well. And I think, I mean, we've been talking all day about how we are maybe getting into a recession. You can debate whether it will happen, I mean, within months or within, a couple of years. But, I mean, we are heading towards that. The only way is to produce better products at the same price. Because I don't think that people will be willing to pay a too high premium just to go green. And we need everyone to switch very fast. So I think we will need to get to price parity.
Totally agree.
Adwaran, why are you making a lot of these efforts? Where does the wanting to do better come from?
Look, I mean, we are a company that work from values. And those values, I mean, push us and give us the energy to make sure that we do the best. We increase our efforts into the carbon emission reduction, increasing the circular economy. This is better for the humanity. And even though if it has cost us more, and I think, at the end is going to bring the value for it, not only for us as an individual company, but I think for the total world. And I think we are part of the world, and that's why we need the collaboration from everyone in this. The circular economy, definitely, it's going to be one of the solutions. The carbon emission reduction and the zero neutrality and the carbon neutrality is also a great solution. It's going to, improve the climate change, definitely. It's going to resolve a lot of challenges that the world is facing. So when a company like ours drive its, objectives and its targets from a values that is going to help the whole world, I think this is the energy that's driving us.
But I think I have a question for you from the audience, which is how can we fix a microplastic problem? So how can you fix things that you can't see that we all know about, and how do we prevent and clean that up efficiently?
Sure. Yes, it's very hard to get the smallest pieces of plastic out of the environment. The good news is, though, that still in terms of mass, most of the plastic at this moment in the ocean is large stuff. About 92% of the plastic is still larger than 5 millimeters, which is the official definition as where microplastics start. And the way most microplastics get created that are in the ocean is actually by degradation from the larger object. So what we say is, we can't fix 100%, so let's focus on the stuff that we can fix, and thereby we prevent the creation of 10 times, 100 times more microplastics in the future. So yeah, but I think the best way there is really to prevent it.
Does anybody think that actually we've taken a step back in terms of thinking about sustainability or upcycling and circular economy because of the last 3 years? Jenny?
I think to some extent this has made it more clear. I mean, 3 years ago there were a lot of people still debating climate change in general. I think we're way past that now with where we are in the world. I also think that, the UN has made it very clear now. They've declared that the survival of our species, now we're talking about humanity, that will ultimately depend on the survival of the ocean. I think everyone feels that it's super clear what we need to get done. But getting back to, I don't think that people will just go green if it costs more or something else. It needs to be market-driven, it needs to be better. And if you just, for example, change goes where money flows, right? So if you look at the investors, everyone knows, based on where we're heading, that we need to go circular. You can debate whether it will be 1.5. We're absolutely not tracking towards 1.5 degrees, much more than that. But even if it ends up 2, 3, 4 degrees, what will happen is that society will be circular. And already now you can see that there's tons of companies that won't survive in a circular economy because they don't have a circular business model. They don't have those kind of customers. So I think we will see a lot of stranded assets being companies that are not going towards net zero. So I think that this will, you see a lot of interesting initiatives from people in this room and others. It will be the companies driving these forwards. It won't be the politicians, unfortunately.
But how is the danger of greenwashing real? So unless we talk with the same data points, you talk about the circular economy, which is going to be very different from someone else in the audience.
So I think we need to measure a lot, and we need to make sure that you cannot greenwash from that perspective anymore. So, for example, what we did, we had an external auditor go through all the company, so Cicero Shades of Green. We're actually super proud that I believe we're the only manufacturing company in the world that are 100% dark green, which says you're 100% part of the new economy, because all the parts that we have that are not net zero or 100% clean manufacturing, that's because that technology isn't around today. And I think that we need to demand that people are more open with the data. How do you do that? And net zero is an amazing way of looking at it, because previously it was too tricky. What is carbon neutrality? And it's very tricky to look at that, but now we have the science-based targets. And if you look at net zero, that's very easy to relate to. Every company can relate to that at least.
How do we avoid greenwashing?
No, I want just to go back on the previous question you said. What we need to do, I think we need to adjust. I'm talking from a manufacturing point of view, because this is the area that I come from. And I think we need to adjust what we are doing right now. Look back on everything that we do in our processes and make sure that we adjust everything, even in our investments. Anything that is not going to be sustainable long term, we should not do it. We should make sure in anything that we do, even though, I can understand that there is some, values that we need to be generated for our stakeholders in totality. So environment is one of our stakeholders. So we should consider this. We should consider the value that it comes to the environment as a stakeholder. So if we adjust our processes and make sure that everything that we do, even if it is a small modification or it is a big investment, or it is a major, crackers and derivatives of chemicals and petrochemicals, it has to be sustainable. Long term, it has to be sustainable. It has to drive the neutrality in the carbon emission.
Joey, on greenwashing? How do you, but also your competitors, which may not be as green?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the last two comments are really authentic, like clearly well-resourced plans to get down and reduce carbon. And I would just second the notion that having something that's an objective measure is incredibly important. And I do think, you know, the pandemic, to your question, of course, there was an influx of packaging that was in everybody's faces immediately. And so I think there's a reaction to that. And so a lot of brands that face consumers are now starting to talk quite a lot about recycling and take-back programs and things that I don't generally think map back to authentic action or initiatives within the company. So I think we're at risk at the moment right now of a giant confusion. And you ask 10 people what sustainability means, and they'll give you 10 different answers. And so I do think we're at a moment right now where there is real risk of so much confusion that unless we can help standardize and push towards a level of objectivity, that we could get in trouble.
But Boyan, I mean, I guess, and that's a very valid point that we always need to remember. Do you see in general, because we're almost out of time, do you just see in general more support from what you're doing from maybe parts of the world or governments that you were not expecting it to come from?
Yeah, like I think it's definitely increasing. I mean, you referenced the pandemic. I mean, I don't think that slowed down the general trend towards a more sustainable world. I do think that there's lessons there that, you know, if you force things upon people, there are people that maybe say, I don't like this. So ultimately, I think, you know, building towards a future that we do agree with rather than fighting against the things we don't agree with, I think that's something that anyone can be behind. And I think, you know, the panelists and hopefully also the ocean cleanup are good examples of that.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Abdulrahman, Jenny, Boyan, and Joey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage founder and managing partner of Skybridge Capital, Anthony Scaramucci, and managing editor of Bloomberg News, Stacey Marie Ishmael.
Hey, Stacey.
What's going on in crypto these days, Anthony?
Oh my God, what's going on in crypto? Well,
I heard you lost some money.
Well, I actually didn't lose the money because Sam gave me the money. But yes, we lost money in general because the overall portfolio has gone down as a result of this debacle. So yes, I guess so, yeah.
So let's start by saying that for those of you who follow crypto markets closely, I'm sorry. For those of you who don't follow crypto markets closely, one of the most important things to understand is 2022 has had a series of events that each time it happened, folks were like, well, this is clearly the worst thing that could happen to this asset class. And then in the past 5 days, we experienced a pretty significant set of bankruptcy filings and revelations about the FTX crypto exchange empire and related entities that were all headed and founded by a gentleman named Sam Bankman-Fried, which brings us to the subject of this conversation today. You, mere weeks ago, it feels like, announced that you and SBF, with whom you had various types of business relationships, were entering into a transaction in which you would sell 30% of your fund.
My firm, yep.
Of your firm to Sam. That is a portion of your life's work that is now kind of going to be caught up in bankruptcy proceedings, possible liquidation. Talk a little bit about how you got to the point of entering into that relationship with Sam and what you've learned since then.
Yeah, so I don't want to revise history. I want to talk about it before the fact and then after the fact. So I met Sam through a mutual friend. I had an investment in something called Ledger X, where I was one of the seed investors, which was a crypto derivatives exchange that had some licenses that were very important in the United States. And so I made a connection to Sam Bankman-Fried, to that group. He ended up buying that group, and it looked like a great transaction for everybody. And prior to this past week, they seemed very happy together. And then it dovetailed into a discussion about doing a sponsorship for the SALT conference. And so as you guys know, we have a hedge fund conference that we sort of morphed slightly into a crypto event. And Sam wanted to be the lead sponsor, so sort of like SALT FTX, if you will. And so we negotiated a transaction with him, which was a 3-year deal. John, I think it was a 3-year deal. And so we did the conference at the Javits Center successfully. And then we made a decision to do a conference with him in the Bahamas, because that's where his FTX International was based. That was, I think, a very successful event, which led to me having a lunch with him over the summer. And so I met with Sam in August in the Bahamas, and he said, listen, I'm interested in buying the company. And
The whole company at the
whole
time.
company. I was hesitant to do that. I'm 58 years old, spent my life's work. I said, listen, why don't we start slower than that, smaller than that, and I would probably need cash as opposed to stock because of my age, and sort of I want to pay out some of my partners that would be there with me. So we negotiated from August 6th to the day that it closed on September 7th, a transaction. He bought 30% of the company, wired us the money. He did ask me to put $10 million of the proceeds into the FTT token, which I thought was in the spirit of the comity of the partnership. I didn't think that was a big deal at the time. So I did that. And then we went to the Middle East. FII was a few weeks ago, probably 15, 16 days ago.
And when you say you went to the Middle East, you hosted him. You were introducing him
I did.
to folks there.
He was raising capital. His narrative, which was unfortunately made up, but his narrative was that he had $1 billion in cash. He wanted to raise another $1 billion. He wanted to fortify his businesses, and he was buying distressed in crypto, sort of to shore up the industry. And so we embarked upon a Middle East trip to Riyadh, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi. And listen, I've been doing this longer than Sam has been alive, and so I have a lot of relationships over there, and I availed him to a lot of those relationships. And I think what happened, frankly, is he said something about CZ, the founder of Binance, in possibly 1 or 2 of those meetings. It got back to CZ. He got super upset about it and said, okay, we're in a divorce. We're not going to make love. That was the Twitter comments, right? And he hit him with about $500 million worth of FTT tokens. And I don't think Sam could keep that token at a level that would support all of the infrastructure and the leverage that he had on his balance sheet. And so we saw a collapse. So weirdly, the association with us and the trip to the Middle East sort of tipped the first domino a lot earlier than maybe that domino would have been tipped otherwise.
Now, just to provide a little bit of context, CZ being the CEO of Binance, Binance sort of emerging from the ashes of this latest fire and kind of positioning him, CZ, but also Binance as like the last trustworthy operator standing. One of the things that CZ has said in the past couple of days is, you know, we as an industry need to come together. We need to support each other. We need to try to raise money, get this fund together. You know, that was a sentiment that was extremely well received, at least by Bitcoin prices. But what is your perspective on an industry that has said for the past decade or so that it's all about transparency, decentralization, a rejection of the norms of traditional finance, that it's turning into a smaller and smaller club?
Well, there was a fight. There was an intellectual fight with Sam related to regulation in the United States. The decentralized philosophical fans of crypto didn't like the direction that Sam was suggesting. So we can debate that or explain that, but I don't really think that's as important as the central point of your question, which is the club is getting smaller, and there's been the crypto industry has been cut to ribbons this year. I think it peaked last November, $3+ trillion. It's just around $800 billion right now. And so what should the industry do to survive and make itself better? My opinion is more collaboration. But the problem with the industry is there's a lot of young people that like antagonizing each other
on Twitter
and lighting each other up on Twitter. And you and I were talking in the green room. I had an old boss at Goldman. He said, your job is to take your 6-shooters and point them out to the enemy. Don't point them on each other. And we do that in this industry, and I think it's a shame. And I think if the industry really wants to grow up, we need a lot more collaboration. I think that there was a red flag, sort of a penalty flag of Sam going after CZ, but also CZ going after Sam. I mean, there was a Twitter spat between the two of them. I think it would be better for everybody if we just sort of calm things down and row in the boat together in synchronicity as opposed to taking the oars and smacking each over the head with the oars. So, yeah, no, there's a definite problem in the industry. But you did mention my business. I just want to just point this out. The good news for me, maybe it's a product of having good lawyers, that piece that Sam owns can't be transferred to anybody without my permission.
Including in a liquidation event?
Including in a liquidation event, yeah. They can't force the liquidation because I'm the majority shareholder of the company, so they can't force a liquidation. And remember, it's a minority position. So I'm hopeful that I'll be able to negotiate now with the trustee or the administrator of the bankruptcy a reasonable price for that equity, and we'll buy it back. And our business has been hurt by the association. There's no question about that. But I also think it gives me an opportunity to talk about this very transparently. And I appreciate the invite today because I think it's important to talk about this transparently so that other people don't make the mistake. You know, there are 25 venture capitalists that invested in Sam's business. A lot of them right now, they don't want to share a stage with anybody.
What is the mistake, do you think? Was the mistake investing in him? Was the mistake insufficient due diligence?
Well, I think, you know, listen, I talked to a lot of my friends that were involved in the due diligence process. I think it's very hard to protect yourself against that sort of misrepresentation. Let's call it misrepresentation for right now. You know, if you're being shown a balance sheet that may or may not be accurate, if you're being shown income statements that may or not be accurate, that are being validated by third parties, you know, that's pretty rough. That's very hard to see through. If you're running a background check on somebody like Sam, you're not going to find anything. You know, he was unblemished, if you will, prior to this incident. So I think it's an issue of certain things are going to fall through the cracks, whether you like it or not. Now, remember, he was giving me the money, and so I was looking, and I was doing a lot of due diligence on him, but clearly not enough. And so I think it's important to explain that to people and share it with people, because if just one person could avoid the calamity that I'm living with right now, this week, and perhaps over the next how many weeks, in terms of getting my equity back, it's worth it for me to share the story with you.
You come from traditional finance, and there's been an interesting trend of, you know, Coinbase in its earnings will say things like, we think institutional investors are part of the future of this asset class. We've had crypto-native companies announce major partnerships with firms and funds like BlackRock. What is the sentiment of institutional investors who are looking at the debacle of the past 12 months? Are they thinking, like, now is a time for us to get in on this space because valuations are very cheap? Or are they thinking, oof, we're going to listen to our compliance officers and wait this one out?
So I think it's a combination, frankly. I think there's some of that. I think we saw some movement this year. You know, BlackRock announced that deal with Coinbase, which you remember. They also set up a Bitcoin trust, which I think is an interesting strategy. That means they have demand for it. Fidelity is in the 401k space. We're one of the first companies to be in that 401k space with them as a client, allowing for Bitcoin on our 401k plans. So yes, there's some of that. I think there's also an I told you so moment. There's some schadenfreude in this system, which is human nature. But ultimately, you have to make an intellectual and analytical decision about the use cases of cryptocurrency and the blockchain. Do you think that's going to be part of the future or not? I have drawn the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, that these are better products than what we're currently using in traditional finance. And better products typically get adopted. It may take a while. There may be a resistance from the old guard, but they usually do get adopted. And so I think what happened this year, whether it was 3 Arrows, FTX,
Terra Luna.
Terra Luna, Voyager, Celsius, we pick all the debacles. I think that probably slowed the forward progress and slowed the future, but I still believe that the future is coming. And, you know, there were people that had horses and carriages that thought the horseless carriage was a fad. Bill Gates said in the mid-90s that the internet was a fad. He's a brilliant guy, so he reversed course and obviously started plowing money into the internet. But we can look at every time there's a paradigmatic shift in technology that is transformational, you get this sort of thing, but you also get an induction of bad behavior, whether it's the railroad, steel, et cetera.
Part of the, the frauds that you're identifying, railroad, steel, et cetera, were met by fairly assertive regulatory responses.
Yeah, absolutely.
And SBF, for better or worse, became, the public face of the industry's attempt to write its own version of regulation. What do you think is going to come next with the regulatory environment globally?
Well, I don't know the answer, but I'm hoping people like a Brian Armstrong, ACZ internationally, Brian in the United States, or people like Brian will step into the vacuum and try to lead in that space and see if they can implore the regulators in the United States to provide more guidance. I think the crypto industry has learned why we have banking regulation, right? Because you had the Wild West in the 1920s, you had another incident with the S&L crisis in the late 80s into the early 90s, and so yes, you need regulation. Unfortunately, we have primordial instincts, and we got a lot of greedy people, and you can set things up without the right guardrails and cause a lot of damage, which is happening right now.
Which is exactly what we're witnessing. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Chief Executive Officer of Bloomberg Media, Scott Havens.
Good afternoon, everyone. Here we are at the end of day one of the Bloomberg New Economy Forum, our day of reckoning. I hope you agree it was a terrific start to the important work we all have to do this week. It was a day of invigorating, sometimes sobering, but always enlightening discussions. This morning, Vice President Wang Qishan vowed that China will never seek hegemony and expressed hope that the U.S. and China can resolve the differences and divides between the two countries. Dr. Henry Kissinger shared his tempered optimism that the U.S. and China are at the beginning of a bridge-building effort. This afternoon, we explored one of the most promising frontiers in emerging markets, digital transformation. And we heard some truly inspiring stories of how digitization is improving people's lives. Of course, the reality is not every story can be hopeful. Robert Friedland reminded us that the basic resources we need to create renewable energy and build electric vehicles are scarce, and that geopolitical tensions may jeopardize access to what little there is. Did you know that the original iPhone contained some 40 elements on the periodic table, and that the iPhone 13 has more than 80? I certainly did not. Let's take a moment to relive some of the day's highlights.
China and the United States, as two major countries, both stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation.
We're at the beginning of a bridge-building effort.
Where we are today is the result of many decisions that were taken and not taken by China and by others, including the United States. I think the key question is, where do we go from here?
The central banks misread the signs. They misread the risk of persistent and much higher inflation. And the price we now have to pay for that is a recession.
So we believe connectivity is important for economic efficiency.
We have a climate problem, which we all accept. We have climate goals that we all need to achieve, but we're sort of being put on the same position on the race.
my team, for choice, thinks 2023, we avoid a recession. I'm a little more skeptical about that.
I look forward to seeing you all here tomorrow for day 2 of the forum, our day of rebuilding. Please note that we will start a bit earlier than we did today. Day 2 kicks off at 8:30 a.m. with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. So please make sure you're here promptly for that conversation. And now please join me and our host partners, Singapore, for a networking reception at Bob's Terrace on the 2nd floor here at the Capella. There you'll enjoy a taste of Singapore featuring innovative and sustainable cocktails and local delights. Thank you again for being here with us at the 5th Annual New Economy Forum. Enjoy the evening, and we'll see you here tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us for the first day of the Bloomberg New Economy Forum, and we'll see you tomorrow.